We are finishing, again, a series called Five Things I Wish Jesus Never Said. Now, the reason I love this series, I love coming at it from the approach of the fact that we love, this is us, Easter, gathering together with so many, just thousands in the world who woke up this morning and decided to celebrate, as we've been singing about all morning, the risen Lord, this special day in terms of what we just kind of us remembering. Every Sunday is Easter Sunday, but this is a kind of a special day just to talk about it. But for us, Jesus gave life-giving words to us, and we love so many of the things that Jesus said. But what we wanted to do is talk about the few things that we were kind of wish he didn't say. Right? Because it's either so clear or it calls us to such a standard or it's something with no loopholes at all that it's very difficult for us sometimes to get by with some of the ways we want to live our life, get by with some of the things that we would rather do and rather believe. And so we just talked about five. This is just 5 things, 5 different weeks of things he said. And today we're going to talk about a moment in time in which Jesus, prior to his crucifixion, as he's teaching his disciples, says something that would become an iconic statement, kind of an iconic thematic statement that not only represented one of the reasons he was going to die, but also just for our faith in general. And it would become something that many people would struggle with for the rest of their lives. Many people would struggle with, even though it's a very clear statement, people are going to struggle with in terms of all generations, all nations, in terms of what he said and how clear it was. So we're going to do that today. But before I do that, as I was thinking about this theme, I started thinking about puzzles. Okay, everybody with me on puzzles? How many of you guys liked puzzles when you were growing up? Puzzles, right? How many of you guys still, as adults, just love puzzles? Just puzzles and wine and some emo music, and you're there, right? Just leave me be, right? Just let me zone out. And so I know, but puzzles are interesting to me. I'm not very good at puzzles. I'm just not. I've never been very good at it as a kid or even as an adult, so I don't spend much time there. I do it sometimes with others. That's fun, right? When you're doing it with other people, and there's the bossy one and the one who everybody wants to get along with. So, you know, what's funny about puzzles is there's so many different approaches, right? Some people start with the outer rim. Some people start with, caricatures or animals or people, things they can make out. Some people like having the box in front of them. Some people want to be surprised, right? They just want to, let's just go for it. Some people want to do the sky or some of the blank things first and just find the way the puzzles, fit before they do anything else. There's a lot of different approaches to puzzles. And as I was beginning to think about puzzles, the reason this theme mattered to me was because I did actually kind of look at it and say our approach to puzzles is sometimes determined by the picture of the end product, right? So, I mean, in terms of me as approaching puzzles, usually my puzzle things look like this, where I've got the picture of the box sitting there that I'm going for, and then I start to work the approach to the puzzle comes from the picture that I see. And that is how I see oftentimes kind of happens. It allows me to kind of do what I want to do. Maybe I'll do the edges first. Maybe I'll do the people first or the tree first. Maybe I'll do this sky first. I don't know. It allows for a lot of unique who we are in terms of how we want to do puzzles. But there's one picture, there's one way this puzzle was designed to be done, and there's with kind of one goal. And so no matter what it is, but our approach to it is still gonna be determined by that end goal, by that end picture. And I was beginning to think about this statement that Jesus made that we're going to talk about in a minute, but generation after generation, nation after nation, culture after culture, in our history, we can look back and see that all of those people have been trying to find their way to God. You can't even study a nationality, you can't study a time in history, you can't study a people group or a period of time that you don't, in terms of study, come across what it was that they believed in terms of how they were going to approach God, how they were going to deal with things, what their God looked like, and how they needed to act in terms of that. So that's just a big part of who we are as mankind. It's just a big part of our history. And so I began to think about that and think through the same statement that really our approach to God is often determined by our view of God. Right? You can look at that in terms of historical precedents, but depending on how you viewed God, I just gave you a few examples, but like here's Ra and Zeus, right? So the Egyptian god Ra and how they viewed all the gods, but Ra especially, and Zeus was kind of the same character for the Greek version of gods. And so depending on how they viewed it, really kind of depended on it, determined their approach to approach them. A God that was, ruled with fear and might and strength. Was always meddling in the affairs of men and trying to bend them to their will. Some people have a view of that, and it affects their approach in terms of how they view God. It could be for you anything. It could be kind of an Eastern religion, more of a Buddha or Hinduism, or something that has a lot more to do with just peace and centeredness and enlightenment in terms of the mind and spirituality kind of connected. That's kind of that. If you have that picture, that your approach is determined by what kind of end picture of who God is or what God is or the light or whatever the case is. If there is no God, this is kind of my example of atheists or people that just don't believe in any type of that kind of faith, well then really you're just trusting in you. So the end picture is ultimately you, right? That's a guy looking in the mirror. The picture is just you. You're trusting in you to figure this out. You're trusting in you in terms of how you approach your life and your faith and other things like that. It doesn't matter, but your picture is going to determine your steps. And that's even the case with Jesus, right? That's even the case with Christianity. It's depending on how you picture Jesus. I pulled some old, famous pictures of the superhero Jesus with the cape, and the shepherd Jesus. And they're all, pale-skinned, Aryan, which is exactly what he looked like, I'm sure. Blonde, flowing locks. Weird heart thing. I don't know what that is. Artistically kind of done. This is sometimes, but just understand, how we sometimes picture Jesus, how we picture God, will determine the approach we take. If he rules with fear and might and mystery, then it changes how we approach him. If it's if Jesus is this Jesus or hippie Jesus or biker Jesus, whatever you want to call it. It will determine how you live. It'll determine the approach you take. And then I went a little step further and I thought, that's true even of just the Christian life. That's true of us. And I just thought about the Christian life in terms of our approach to life is determined by the desired outcome of that life. Whatever we desire and kind of see as the end result of a life, it'll determine our approach in life and the things we do. And sometimes Christianity is confusing because sometimes people don't want to have anything to do with Christianity because oftentimes the picture is kind of a turn or burn, kind of a street preacher, judgmental, cynical, kind of us against the world feel, or it's a group of people that really just have a license to hate and discriminate and cause problems for everybody else, and they want to be isolated, and they want to morally legalize morality and try to fix all the problems just through those things. I look at that and I go, look, sometimes that's a problem because we view this life like this. It determines our approach. The same is true if you just consider a life full of, sacrifice. So it could be like Mother Teresa, where it's, just sell everything. And you go to the poorest of the poor and you give everything to them. Or maybe your approach in the Christian life is, the view you have, the outcome you're looking at is one that's just, there's no rules, there's no ideals, there's nothing to worry about. God's love wins. God's love just covers it all, and it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter your end picture in terms of the God you serve, whatever it may be, whatever the life you think you want to have. Your approach is going to be determined by how you see those things. And this is very, very true of this moment in time where Jesus steps on the scene to do his ministry. For 3.5 years, he's doing his ministry with these guys called disciples, and he has a smaller group of 3 and a bigger group of 12, and then a larger group that kind of follow him around. And you get to Jerusalem, and I can't really go through the whole context, but you get to sort of this last night, really, with his disciples. It's the Last Supper. And he's already going to, if you go back to last week, and I'll kind of catch you up, but they've already done the supper. He's already talked about Judas betraying him. He's already told them that he's going away somewhere several times. This is the last week. This is the end. The disciples don't really get it. They're talking about who's going to be greatest in the kingdom because that's how they viewed things. But he comes on the scene at a time in which everybody has their own view. The Romans are ruling with might and power and authority with their gods, kind of blessing them. And the religious leaders of the day believe it's all about obedience and behavior and rules and regulations. And so they're trusting in that kind of view of God to their approach. And then the disciples, and so many they're waiting for a king. Like King David, they're waiting for a king to come, a Messiah to come and overthrow Rome. Overthrow Rome and free the people. And so all these people are kind of functioning in this, and Jesus has come to basically say, look, I'm going to tell you the way. And there's this moment in time, again, after he's told Peter he's going to be sifted, and after he's already said he's going. If John records it this way in John 14, I'll put it on the screen so you guys can read along, or you can look in your Bible. It says, don't let your hearts be troubled. I mean, obviously, all the stuff he was sharing with them, especially since this comes right after the whole sifting part, he's saying, look, don't let your hearts be troubled. I know you're kind of worried about this. Trust in God and trust also in me. And then he goes on to say more about his leaving. There's more than enough room in my Father's home. If this were not so, would I have told you that I'm going to prepare a place for you? He says, where everything is ready, or when everything's ready, I will come and get you so that you will always be with me wherever I am, and you know the way to where I'm going. Now, Thomas, one of his disciples, at this point interjects and says, no, we don't know, Lord. Thomas said, we have no idea where you're going. So how can we know the way? I love this because I love any time Jesus is kind of talking to the disciples, because the disciples always say the thing that you and I are thinking, or just reveal the humanity in them, because it's like Thomas has missed the memo or missed a few meetings, right? And he's just sitting there, and Jesus is describing again the fact that he's going somewhere, and Thomas goes, over here. You guys know where I'm going. No, we don't have any idea where you're going. We have no idea what you're talking about, right? And then here comes the statement. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me. This verse, this statement would become so iconic in its theme to underscore the foundation of our faith. But this is just a conversation that Jesus is having. When Thomas goes, I don't know the way. Can you show us the way? And he says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Then Philip says this. Philip, just takes a moment and says, Lord, show us the Father, and we will be satisfied. Other translations actually says, and that will be enough. Show us the Father and we'll be satisfied. Show us the Father. You keep talking about the Father's house, and you're talking about you and the Father. Just show us the Father, and that will be enough. That we will be satisfied. We'll do whatever you say then. And he goes on to say this. Have I been with you all this time, Philip, and yet you still don't know who I am? Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. Jesus spends time talking about both him and the Father, but this is a time in which he's kind of this last teaching. He's trying to help them understand how close they really are related in terms of intertwined with each other. He says, look, I say what the Father's saying. I hear what the Father's saying, and I say what he's saying. I see what he sees. The Father and I are one. The foundation for which when he goes to be tried and they say, who do you think you are? He tells them who he is. And so this moment for Philip brings clarity, but at the same time, Jesus is helping them to understand, look, just trust this. Just understand this. Just believe that when you see me, this is what it looks like. You can touch me. You can laugh with me. You can embrace me. This is the relationship that you get to have with the Father. My life is the expression of his life. And then down in verse 11, where we're going to end the conversation just for today, Jesus says, just believe that I am the Father and that the Father is in me, or at least believe because of the work you've seen me do. He says, look, I want you to believe what I'm saying, but at least believe because of the evidence of the work that you've seen me do. Again, this moment where we really do understand that this phrase is going to come around and say, look, I'm the only way. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. There's no other way. There's no one who comes to the Father except through me. And we can be tempted to think several things. I mean, the way he phrases it sounds like Jesus is going to become like a cosmic bouncer, where he's just like, like this at the door, not letting anybody in. But the reality is that there's something about those three phrases that he makes a comment about that matters. Something about the reason that John's older when he writes this. John is older in his age. He's recounting those times with Jesus when he records this life. That's one of the reasons John's gospel is not chronological. It's thematic in its writing. And he goes on to talk about all these teachings that Jesus gave right there at the very end. And this is one of those moments that I can only imagine John sort of smiling as he wrote it, because he understood the fullness of the three things that Jesus would say. I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. And no one gets to come before the Father except through me, because the Father and I are one. And yet, throughout history, it should be a breath of relief. Like Jesus shows up on the scene and finally says, look, everybody for generation after generation, culture after culture, civilization after civilization, they've all been trying to find a way to get to God, regardless of what picture they have of God. I'm here to tell you that I'm the way to God. And it should be this breath of relief, this sigh, this like, thank goodness, because I've been searching and trying to find it and trying to figure it out on my own. And yet for the last 2,000 years, even after Jesus has made this statement, people are still searching. People are still hunting. People are still striving to find a way to reconcile to God. Find a way to make themselves right. Find a way to figure it out on their own. And so there's this moment where Jesus says something that becomes so controversial. I don't know, call it the rebellious nature of the heart of man. You can't tell me what to do. You tell me what to do, I'm going to do the opposite. Call it the fact that it's so clear and it's so simple, maybe it's too simple. Most of us approach it and say, well, look, there's got to be more than that. There's got to be more than just Jesus. Maybe it's not simple enough. Maybe it's not simple enough. Maybe because they look at the Bible and they look at the rules and the regulations and the law and they look at that, they're like, there's too much. There's no way I can follow all of this. There's no way I'm signing up for that. And so no matter what Jesus has said, people have still been searching. People have still been searching and trying to find a way. And so I just want to look at those three things for just a minute as we kind of finish this idea that he very clearly says, look, I'm the way, I'm the truth, I'm the life. The last part of the verse gives us the implication that he's like, I'm the only way. There's only one way. There's only one life. There's only one truth. And so I want to start with this idea of one way. And this isn't just only the way of salvation. This isn't just, this can be taught so many different ways, but I believe in the conversation that he's having with the disciples. Thomas says, we don't know the way. And he's like, look, I've been living with you for the last 3.5 years. Understand that I'm the way. Everything that I've been teaching you, everything that you've been learning, I'm the way. I'm the way to life. I'm the way to live. I'm showing you the one way to the best life you can have. That there's one way to honor God. Have no other gods before you. There's one way to treat others, to love neighbors, your neighbor as yourself. There's one way this is what the last 5 weeks has been, even some of the series that we've been doing. When he makes these statements, he's saying, look, there's one way to do this. And that works. Deny yourself. This is when Jesus said, deny yourself, take up your cross and follow me. If you want to know what it looks like to follow me, this is the way. Is it God or money? He would teach that you can't aim your life at both. You can't have both be the master of your life. One's going to be the master, one's going to be the slave. You're going to be slave to one and master of another. And it said, look, you can't have both. You can't aim. This is not a both and equation. It's going to be money or it's going to be God. Which one are you going to live for? There's thoughts equals actions. This is that time even when Chris talked about the Sermon on the Mount and said, look, lust equals adultery. I know that you guys have focused so hard on your behavior. You focus so hard on the rules of religion. You focus so hard on what people see on the outside. And Jesus came to say, look, the way that I'm telling you is that your thoughts matter. Your motives matter. What's inside that no one else sees counts, not just your behavior. Last week we talked about the fact that sifting would happen, that struggles would happen, that trials would happen, and Jesus would be there to say, look, trials are going to happen. In this world, you're going to have trouble. And he says, but take heart. I've overcome the world. There's one way. There's only one way in this life to the Father. And that's what I've been doing. That's what I've been showing you. That's what I've been teaching you. This is what Jesus would say. That's what I've been spending those last 3.5 years doing and living and showing you the way for you. And I'm going to provide a way through my death and my resurrection for you to be reconciled to God. There's only one way. He'd also say there's one truth. And this is hard, again, for us because we kind of grow up in this world of there's no absolute truths anymore. There's perspective truths, and there's temporary truths, and there's, what's true to you versus what's true to me. And Jesus would say, I'm the truth. There's an absolute truth that exists that will never change. And it's me. Matter of fact, he would even say this, and I love this, that he said this to Philip in verse 11 as we recap that. He would say to Philip, look, just believe that I'm the Father and the Father's in me, or at least, he's like, this is the lowest bar. Believe it because of the work you see me do. Believe it because of the evidence of what you've seen, the evidence of the work, the evidence of my life. You're going to believe that there is something that is true. And this is a statement that kept running around in my mind as I kept thinking through even the resurrection itself, was that what is true, go to the next slide real quick. What is true will be revealed and will remain. But what is false will always fade away. This is something that I looked at and said, look, this is just true. In your life, as you live, what is absolutely true will be revealed. And it will remain, because what is true cannot change and will not change. It's not what I've heard recently called a temporary truth, meaning it's true just for this circumstance or this season. No, that's not an absolute truth. An absolute truth cannot change. It will not change, and that is what Jesus is saying. But everything else that's false, everything else that is a counterpart, anything else that's counterfeit, it's going to fade away. Which is why for 2,000 years, many religions, many nations, many civilizations have risen up and tried to figure out how to get to God and find a way to approach God. And things have had to be altered and changed and adjusted and fixed and changed for the culture and changed for the time. But for 2,000 years, to celebrate the fact that Christ rose from the grave, the event that changed history, the event that changed and was the foundation of our faith, has never changed. Has never changed. Why? Because we don't believe that Jesus died and rose again because a book told us he did. We don't believe that. You don't believe anything like that you read in a book. That's not the reason we believe it. Before there was ever a book, before there was a New Testament, before there was anything written and documented, people saw it. People had the evidence of the work that Jesus did himself, including the resurrection. Matthew saw it and recorded it. John saw it and recorded it. Mark talked to Peter and recorded it. Luke interviewed all the eyewitnesses and recorded it. Peter saw it. Paul saw it. James, the brother of Jesus, saw it. Now listen, just that alone should tell you, what would your brother have to do to convince you that he's God? Right? This is one of the reasons that James is even mentioned early in the New Testament in Jesus' story, because he's just the brother. There's Jesus doing his thing again, whatever. Until he sees the work and it reveals the truth, that James becomes a leader in the church and a leader of the movement and a huge, huge voice for Christianity. He tells Philip, which is the same thing we see, listen, I want you to believe it just because I said it, but if you can't do that, that's fine. Just believe it based on the evidence of my work. It's the reason you believe. If you have a relationship with Christ, it's the reason you believe. It's not because someone weaved a tale for you one day. It's not because someone told you a story one day and you said, wow, that sounds like a great story. I'm going to live for that. That doesn't last. That will fade. You believe what you believe because at some point in your life there was evidence that showed you what you believe. It was the working itself out in your mom or your dad or your brother or your college roommate, and you couldn't reconcile it outside of the fact that it was unbelievable, but it was undeniable, the work of Christ in them. That's what the Spirit does. There's one truth, and it's revealed, and it remains. But every other approach, every other angle we try to get to God, or our view of God, that's false, that's outside of Jesus Christ, it will fade away. And then he says, I am the life. And I think this is great because he's talking about life in all of these, but he kind of ends it with this idea that I'm the source of life, right? I'm the source of real life. So I want to share just something that bothers me some, and I want to just kind of go for a small rant. But before I do that, I got to share a quick story because I like visuals. Visuals are good. They help me remember things, right? We were about 5 years married. My wife and I got married when we were 18, 19 years old. And about 5 years into our marriage, we had just finished schooling and all that kind of thing. And we were kind of just actually starting to make some money. And at that time, my wife really wanted a convertible. It was like her dream car. A convertible was her dream car. Now, I couldn't afford her dream car because it was like a Mercedes blankety blank, convertible. This is back in 1998, 99, right? That's what she really wanted. So I went, I'm going to show you a picture. This is a 1998 Mazda Miata. You guys know this car? Anybody remember this car? Okay. This is a 1990 Mazda Miata. And about the 98, 99 time frame, I want my wife to have a convertible. So I'm doing I realized how cheap they are at that time. And I was like, wow, maybe I could do this. So I dropped by one day. I was working out of town. I dropped by this lot one day to take a test drive. Okay. Now, I don't know, this is not to scale, but it's almost to scale. Right? Almost. And I'm not a small man. So I go into the salesman and I say, I'd like to test drive this is the red Miata. And he looked at me for a moment. And he said, okay, let's go. So first thing first, we have to take the top off so I can get in. And that should have been a clue, but I wanted to test drive it anyway. And as we go to test drive it, I realize also that it gets better as we go along because I realize it's just easier for me to look straight over top of the windshield to know where I'm going than to try to crouch down and see through this little windshield. And as I'm in there, and I don't know if you remember these cars, but it was so cheaply made. I got in, I thought if I sneezed, I was going to rip the steering wheel right off. And I remember doing research on it later and realizing that if you hit a bunny, the engine would fall out. It was a very unsafe car. And I remember that story because I remember just thinking about how fragile and just cheap and what I thought that was made, and it just didn't fit me at all, and it wasn't going to fit Tracy probably. So I just was like, that's so silly. But honestly, guys, I struggle sometimes with people who treat the Christian life as something that is so fragile. That's something that is so weak and so fragile and so frail, and it's as if it's a house of cards. That with one little cynicism or one little wind of challenge, that it's just going to fall apart. Because that is not the life that Jesus lived. That is not the life that we were called to. That's not the life that we've been given by him. Not this frail, fragile thing that will fall apart at any moment or fall apart once the first speed bump in the road. And yet so many people look at Christianity and they struggle with Christianity and they treat Christianity as if we have to be so careful what we're exposed to. We have to be so careful what we try. We have to be so careful about what we do. We do not have to be careful. We have an absolute truth and an absolute power and an absolutely rich and glorious, limitless life because of who Jesus is. And in comparison, all I could do is think about this. I did some research on this. I could think of the Humvee, right? I was like, you know what? That really does. I remember reading some things about it, and I remember ABM, who built it, said back when they first built it for the Marines, they said, look, it was made to be driven hard. That's the quote that was given. It was made to be driven hard. This is not a Sunday afternoon cruise vehicle. It was made to climb mountains, cross rivers, be rolled over, be hit, be struck, go over obstacles, and keep going. And that is the life that Jesus says, I want to give to you. To the disciples who would scatter at his crucifixion in fear and in confusion. And yet with the Holy Spirit and Jesus' resurrection would return with fearlessness and boldness, and they would begin to live the one life that they were given by Christ to live. It's a huge difference. You do not need to treat your Christianity, your faith, as something fragile and something you got to be really, really careful with. It was made to be driven hard. Okay, it was made to be challenged. It was made to be tested. It was made to be put yourself out into areas where you risk and you try things and you lean on him only and fully because he will not fail you. Our faith is not a house of cards. Our faith is deeply rooted on a rock that will not move. So here's Jesus saying, look, I'm the one way. I'm providing a way. I've been living this way for you to see. I'm the one way. I'm the one truth, absolute truth. I am the life, the source of life for you. You do not need to struggle and strive and hunt for a way to approach God anymore. I've made a way. Our hunting and our searching and our striving, it's meant to end with Christ. Everything in your life that is frustrating, everything in your life that you struggle with, every time you run into things that fade away, every time you run into obstacles you can't overcome, it's all meant to point you to Christ. Same way the law was meant to show that we couldn't do it without God, everything we deal with is meant to point us to our Savior. No wonder you can't do it. No wonder it's you try every time and it fails. No wonder you're still struggling after years and years and years of hunting and searching and striving. No wonder, because everything was made to point to the way where you wouldn't have to do anything about it. He did it all for you. For me personally, one of my favorite passages, Matthew records it in a time when Jesus is really talking to the Jewish followers. He's talking to the Jewish people who, again, they've been looking for a Messiah. They've been looking for a king to come in and overtake Rome. They've been looking for everything, but they're so burned out on religion. They're so burned out on the weight of the law. They're so burned out on what the Pharisees have placed on them, what they feel like, and what they've told them that God's placed on them. And Jesus comes. And in Matthew 11, he actually says this. Are you tired? Worn out? Burned out on religion? This is his question to them. Come to me. Get away with me and you will recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. And every time I read this, I am marked with the question, am I tired? Am I wore out? Am I burning out on religion? If freely and lightly does not describe your walk with Christ, then you're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong. If you're not, it's like, walk with me. Let me show you. Let me help you. When you find those places of frustration, when you find those places where you're just exhausted, I am telling you, it is a clear picture for you and I that we have drawn our own version of what we think God should be. We have charted our own approach as to how to approach him. And we are exhausted because we can't ever seem to get there. And Jesus said, no, I've made a way. I've made a way for you. Come to me. That way is light, and you will recover your life if you just come to me. And yet, again, for some of us, this is a struggle. It's a struggle because it almost sounds too easy. It almost sounds like it should cost more. But the reason it's easy is because Jesus did it all for you. The reason it doesn't cost more is because he paid the price in full. And so I would ask you just the same question this morning. I don't know where you are in your journey. I don't know where you are in your walk with God. If you believe what picture of God you have that you're working towards, I don't know. I would ask the same question that Jesus asked. Are you tired yet? You've been going to church for years, but you're worn out. You're burned out, trying to figure out these rules. The approach that you have does not equal in your mind anything that's free or light. And you would do anything to recover your life. The message today is that Jesus made a way. And he's the one way and one truth and one life that he knows we need, and delivered it for us through his death and through his resurrection to give us what no one else could. Are you tired? Are you worn out? Are you burned out? In any area of your life. Because that's an area of your life where you have made your own approach. You've tried to figure it out on your own. And Jesus is just saying, hey, come hang out with me. Come back to me. And you'll find rest there. We're going to sing and worship in just a minute. But before we do that, let's pray together. Heavenly Father, I'm so thankful for your word. And I'm so thankful for how you give us a truth that never changes. That every other approach to God's or to God's in our mind, every other approach needs to be altered and changed and shifted and tweaked all the time for circumstantial reasons. And yet, God, your way never changes. It is the way to our best life. It is the only truth that has so much evidence around it. And it is the source of life that we crave, but we don't come to you for it. God, just break our hearts today. As we remember your resurrection, as we remember the price that you paid and the life that you gave and then took back to reconcile us to the Father. God, I would just pray that if you're here now today, and listen, I just want you to be honest, you're just worn out. And I don't know what you've been following, and I don't know the approach that you've had in your life, but if you're ready today to say, look, my way's not working, I want to choose your way. I want the way that Jesus himself provided. If that's where you are, would you just raise your hand? Just raise it up and put it down. You don't need to leave it hanging up there for too long. But if that's where you are, just raise it up and put it back down. I want to pray for you. Matter of fact, I'm going to pray for you, but I also want you to pray with me, okay? I want you to pray with me. And just say these words in your own way, in your own heart. God, I'm so tired of trying to figure this out on my own. My way has not been working. My picture and view of you has not been clear and correct. God, I want to give up my way, my life. And I want to accept your way, your life, where you paid the price for me. You delivered life to me through your death and resurrection. Jesus, I want to live your way. I want to see the attributes of those verses come to life. A life that's free and light, the unforced rhythms of grace, walking with you, communing with you, living this life you've called me to live with you. God, I give you my heart. And as I pray for those who have prayed that prayer, God, I'm so thankful that you called us out beyond our comfort zone. You've called us out beyond what we are even naturally inclined to do, to follow you in such a way that our best life is waiting for us. Our life, the real life we long for, is waiting for us. But sometimes it just takes us to take a step. It requires us to get past our fear and get past our apprehensions and trust you because of the evidence of the work of your life. May that be our prayer today, God, as we sing, as we worship, as we respond to you at this time. In your name, Jesus, amen.